Hello everyone, welcome back to another news and rumor video. In today's video we got a couple of things to discuss. So we're starting off with a sad piece of news. We'll touch on that, plus also looking at some signings, a PTO update, and some trade rumors involving the Jets, Leafs, Kings, and the Flames. We'll go to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're able to help you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so we can all discuss in this video. Now, we have to start off today by discussing a really sad piece of news. It happened Thursday night. We got confirmation that it indeed happened on Friday morning, and that is the fact that former now Jacket and Calgary Flame player Johnny Gaudreau has unfortunately passed away. According to a couple of reports, Gaudreau and his brother Matthew, who were in New Jersey for his sister's wedding, were on their bikes and they were hit by a drunk driver and they unfortunately passed away due to their injuries. So that's a horrible thing to have happened. Gaudreau was only 31 years old, his brother was 29, so both those guys were gone way too young. That you never want to see anything like this happen. He was still had a long hockey career plus a long life ahead of him, so I do send my condolences to the Gaudreau family. It definitely hurts. There was a lot of people on social media paying their respect to Gaudreau yesterday. Lots of Flames fans, lots of Jackets fans, but just sports fans in general. I saw people from football, baseball, basketball all pay their tributes to Gaudreau. He was a very fantastic guy. I never knew him personally, but it seemed like he had a really good personality. It seemed like he was a good father, a good husband. He was a father of 2 kids, so we send our condolences to the family. You never want to see anything like this, but unfortunately, due to a bad accident that happened, Johnny Gaudreau has indeed passed away. So that's a really bad piece of news to start this video with, but it is something that's newsworthy. You never want to see anything like that happen. So my condolences to the Gaudreau family, and both Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau, who played college hockey together, are both gone too soon. So bad news there, but former really good superstar player Johnny Gaudreau, who was an inspiration to a lot of young players who are on the smaller side of things, has indeed passed away. So bad news there to start off this video. But going over to a couple of other pieces of news, we're going to start over here today with, once again, signings that have happened from over the past couple of days. First, the Ottawa Senators have signed a new deal with UFA forward Nick Cousins. Cousins last year was part of the Stanley Cup winning Florida Panthers team. Cousins was a really big piece of that team as like a fourth line forward. He was sometimes a healthy scratch too, so he was not an overly great big piece, but he gets a 1-year deal in Ottawa with $800,000. So that should be able to help them fill out a fourth line role or a spare forward role in Ottawa. This past year, come off a season where he had 7 goals and 15 points in 69 games. One of his lower point totals of the past 2 seasons. Didn't have this low of a point total since the 16-17 season, but still, he was a productive player. He was a solid bottom 6 forward, and he really helped the Panthers win the Stanley Cup this year. So he's going to be a good add to the Ottawa Senators team. Also had some physicality, so that's going to be a scary Ottawa team to play against. I mean, you got rough and tumble forwards like Tkachuk, Greg, Perron can definitely mix it up there. Now you got Cousins. Like, this team's going to be hard to play against this year. So it's a pretty good pickup there for the Ottawa Senators. Meanwhile, just before I started recording this video, we saw a massive contract extension. And it was just like we were talking about in our last video. The Seth Jarvis extension was going to happen at some point in the next week, it sounded like. It has indeed happened. Seth Jarvis signs a 8-year extension in Carolina with a total money of $63.2 million, so an AAV of $7.9 million. So that's going to be a pretty good pickup there for the Hurricanes. Jarvis last year coming off his best season ever, putting up 33 goals and 67 points in 81 games. So he looked fantastic. Jarvis was a fantastic NHL player last year, so hit 30 goals for the first time in his career, hit 60 plus points for the first time in his career. So if he can continue this trajectory, he could eventually be a solid 85-90 point player to put up 40 goals. So I think for that sort of a type of player, just under $8 million, I think that was pretty good. Now, I originally thought he would sign for between 7, maybe 7.25, so 7.9 is a little bit more higher than I expected. But if Jarvis continues to be able to work his way up in his contract, I think this should be a fine deal for the Hurricanes. So a pretty good sign there for the Hurricanes, but those were 2 signings over the past couple of days. Hurricanes signed Jarvis to a long-term extension, while the Ottawa Senators have signed depth forward Nick Cousins to a new deal. So interesting to note there. We also have a PTO from over the past couple of days, and that was with the Philadelphia Flyers. The Flyers have signed former Sharks prospect goaltender Makiniemi. Makiniemi's never played at the NHL level, so he doesn't have any NHL experience, but he could be a solid third-string him for Flyers if he is able to get a contract with them. So it's not a huge PTO update, not with any of the significant UFAs right now, but it's a decent one. Hopefully he's able to get a PTO with the Flyers. But it's interesting to note there that the Flyers have signed Makiniemi to a PTO, and hopefully he's able to get a contract out of it. But that's the only PTO and signing updates from the past couple of days. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. Now to start with, we're going to talk about a couple of RFAs who could be offer sheet possibilities in the next couple of minutes. But another RFA who I want to start with here, who hasn't really been mentioned a whole bunch over the past little while, who is an unsigned RFA who thinks another possible offer sheet option, is Kailyev. Now Kailyev is a decent player. He had a decent season last year, was actually one of the Kings' leaders in the 5-on-5 goals for per 60 minutes, I think it was, or whatever that stat is. But he was actually a pretty good player last year, but the Kings really didn't want him in the lineup. He lost favor. He wound up being a healthy scratch down the stretch. I think he was healthy scratch most of the time in the playoffs as well. So he wound up losing favor in LA. It sounded like the Kings wanted to move on from him in the offseason. It sounded like he wasn't really willing to sign with the Kings. So at this point in time, he's an unsigned RFA. So if he really doesn't want to sign with the Kings, then I think there's a trade that's going to have to happen, or potentially an offer sheet in the not too distant future. Now, he's still a solid young winger. He can play on the left side. I think he can play on the right side too. He can put up points. I think eventually he could be a solid 20 goal scorer, maybe 40, 50 point player in the right situation. And he could help out a lot of teams' middle sixes. So I'm not exactly sure why there hasn't been too much talked about with Kailyev over the past little while. There's been other names who have been more prominent, at least right now. But I think there's a possibility we could see the Kings make some sort of move. So we're going to have to wait and see. But I think there's a chance we could see the Kings make a move in the not too distant future. So we're going to have to wait and see. But the Kings are very likely to move on from Kailyev. And I think it's only a matter of time before that happens. So we'll have to wait and see. But I haven't heard his name mentioned a whole bunch. But if a team were to offer sheet him to like a Dylan Holloway type deal, I don't think the Kings would match that. And I think they would just take the 3rd round pick. I think if a team were to offer him a 4th or 5th round pick right now, I think the Kings would take it. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for, but I think Kailyev does get moved in the not too distant future, so it's a situation we're going to have to watch out for. Going over to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, we have two things to talk about here. First, Nick Robertson. There's been a lot of mention about his name over the past little while. There's a lot of talk right now that he's not really willing to sign an extension in Toronto, so there's a very likely chance the Leafs will have to move on from him. If he's not signing as an RFA, there's a very likely chance that they're not going to be able to sign him. So there's most likely going to have to be a Robertson trade at some point. My guess would be it'll be happen at some point during training camp. There will be a lot of teams out there who's starting to figure out how their rosters are shaping up, and there could be a couple of teams out there, not only due to injuries, but potentially with just how their roster is shaping up, that could use another top 9 forward. So I think Robertson could be a really good fit for a lot of teams, but we're going to have to wait and see. Robertson's a really good player. Like we said, he can fit in on a team's 3rd line, potentially even 2nd line, put up maybe 15, 20 goals this point in his career, 35, 40 points, can be a solid secondary goal scorer. So I'll be interested to note there. I've heard his name be linked to Pittsburgh a lot recently, just given the fact of how the Dubas situation and how he's connected to a lot of former Toronto Maple Leafs players. So could we see the Penguins and Leafs look up on a deal as possible? Same thing as with Kailyev. There's been some talk about Robertson offer sheet too. If the Leafs were to have Robertson offer sheeted for around, like I said, Dylan Holloway money, I'm not sure if they'd be able to match. They don't have too much cap space, and if a team were to offer sheet him for 2 years at like $2.29 million, I don't really see the Leafs being able to match that. So there's a couple of options there when it comes to the offer sheet market with Robertson and Kailyev, but definitely I think with Robertson's reluctance to sign in Toronto, a trade will be coming in the not too distant future, maybe around training camp, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. Meanwhile, there's been a couple of recent reports when it comes to who the Leafs might try and target when it comes to their left wing upgrade. There's been some mention by Luke Fox around Mike Hoffman and Matt Martin. Both are mostly 4th line forwards at this point in time in their careers. Martin's a guy who can definitely drop the gloves, have some physicality. Won't give you very many points, but he could be a really good 4th liner. Hoffman, meanwhile, playing with really good wingers, could be a solid 3rd, maybe even 2nd liner in Toronto. He didn't have an overly great season last year in San Jose, but I do think in the right situation he can still be a 10 to 15 goal scorer, and he can probably put up like 30, 35 points, especially in an offensive team like Toronto. So that they do make some sense. Another guy who's been linked to Toronto over the past while is Max Pacioretty. We talked about him in our last video. Pacioretty's a really good player. I could see him get new options. Sounds like he's still getting some interest from a lot of teams. He could be a really good fit like Hoffman on like a 2nd or 3rd line and put up like 15 and 20 goals. So I think that could be a really good fit there for the Leafs if they were able to get him. They could sign him to like a 1-year cheap deal and have him be a really solid 4 there for the Leafs. So interesting note there, but according to a couple of recent reports, Robertson does not want to sign with Toronto. So a trade or an offer sheet is very likely to happen in the not too distant future. And guys like Mike Mike Hoffman, Matt Martin, and Max Pacioretty are all guys being linked to Toronto right now as they look for a left winger upgrade. Going over to the Winnipeg Jets, when it comes to them, we have some interesting news when it comes to them about potential offer sheet, another offer sheet potentiality, and that's with Cole Perfetti. Perfetti is one of the remaining RFAs that have not been signed yet. Also another guy who's a potential offer sheet candidate. Now, according to a lot of recent reports, the Jets and Perfetti are still working on a contract, trying to get something done. They do have the cap space to try and make some sort of a move to sign Perfetti, but there's been a couple of recent reports mentioning that if a team were to offer Perfetti a similar thing to what they offered Broberg from St. Louis, where it's like 2 years, I think it's like $4.5 million, not only would the Jets be hard to press to sign that, there would be a potential option there for the Jets not to match that. So it would be interesting to see. I think they would have the cap space to match it, but would they really want to be paying Perfetti $4.5 million for the next 2 seasons? It's debatable. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But there's definitely been some recent rumblings about Perfetti being offer sheeted. I'm not sure exactly which teams would try and offer sheet him like that. I mean, teams who have over $4.5 million who could have potentially an option to offer sheet him. One would be the Utah team. Buffalo would make some sense. San Jose, who's trying to get a little bit better. Columbus as a possibility, Calgary, Anaheim for sure. So there's a couple of other teams. But if there's a team out there who has a second round pick and looking for another forward upgrade who can get Perfetti for the next 2 seasons and have him help in the top 6, that could be a possibility. So we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But Perfetti offer sheet's out there, it sounds like, and it's something we're gonna have to watch out for. And lastly, going over to the Calgary Flames. Now, when it comes to the Calgary Flames, there are 2 things we want to talk about here too. First, Eric Francis was touching on this recently, and he thinks that there's a very likely chance that either at the 2025 trade deadline or the 2026 trade deadline, Rasmus Andersson will be moved by the Calgary Flames. So he definitely thinks it's a very likely possibility that Rasmus Andersson will be a deadline move, either this deadline with him having 1.5 years left or next deadline when he's a pending UFA. And he does not think that Andersson will be signing an extension in Calgary next year, so there's a very likely chance Andersson's probably at this point in time the best trade chip for the Calgary Flames. He's a young defenseman, he's top 4, he plays right side, he can eat up a lot of minutes, he's a really good puck moving defenseman, can put up some points, and at this point in time he's still got 2 years left on his contract. So if they were to move at this year's trade deadline, there would be a ton of teams lining up. I think they could get a return maybe similar to something like the Jacob Chikrin one, maybe a little bit less, but something like a first, a second, and something else, maybe a first, a decent prospect, and something else. I think Andersson could be a somewhat comparable trade to like a Chikrin trade if he was to be dealt at this deadline. If he was to be dealt at next year's trade deadline, it's a possibility it's probably going to be a little bit lower given the fact he'll only have the rest of that year. But if he's moved at some point in this trade deadline, I could foresee the Flames being able to get a huge package in return. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but according to Eric Francis, he thinks there's a very likely possibility that either the 2025 or 2026 trade deadline, Rasmus Andersson will be moved by Calgary Flames, and he probably won't be staying long-term in Calgary. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but I would probably agree. I think there's a very likely chance that at some point over the next calendar year, Andersson will be moved by the Calgary Flames, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. And lastly, there's been some more reports about the Flames making a trade, but not trying to move off an asset, but trying to acquire an overpriced asset. Now, the Flames currently, as it's right now, have around $20 million in cap space with a 23-man roster. So they are good when it comes to having a cap compliant roster. Good enough that there's a lot of people out there who think there's a very likely possibility that they could try and help some teams out of cap strapped situations. Now, there's a very likely chance that they only want to try and acquire someone who's only like on their contract for like a year or 2. So they're not going to try and add someone who's got term on this contract, but they could try and help out a couple of teams who have maybe a bad contract or 2. Like if you look at teams who are currently cap strapped, you could look at a team like the Islanders who are trying to offload Pajot or Andersson right now. That could be an option for them. Seattle seems that they may want to try and move it forward, like a Tanev or a Schwartz. That could be an option for them. There's a couple of other teams out there too, like the Habs have been rumored to potentially be moving off of a forward, like a Dvorak, Armia, Gallagher, Andersson. That could be an option there for the Flames. There are a couple of other teams who are either close to the cap or above the cap right now who have some bad contracts on their systems. So the Flames would try and take one of these guys off of those teams' hands and get like a second or a third round pick, or a decent prospect, that would work for the Flames because they would not only be able to take someone on who can help their team for the foreseeable future and that could potentially be dealt later on, whether it be this year's trade or next year or sometime in the future, but also get them an asset which could really help that team. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but I do agree that there's a very likely chance that with the Flames having so much cap space, using it to their advantage and maybe trying to make some sort of a trade at training camp to try and help some teams out of difficult cap situations would be a smart move for the Flames and could be something we have to watch out for. So that's what I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think down in the comment section below. What do you think about the Flames? Does Andersson get moved at one of these next 2 years deadlines, and if so, what's the return? On top of that, do the Flames make some sort of a cap-eating move where they are able to take off a bad contract from another team? And if so, which team do you think they could try and target? Do the Jets wind up having Cole Perfetti offer sheet? And if so, which team do you think is most likely to offer sheet Perfetti? Do the Leafs wind up signing one of Hoffman, Martin, Pacioretty, or is it someone else who they try and sign? And does Robertson get moved or offer sheet? And if so, what sort of team do you think could try and do that? Does Arthur Kailyev get moved before season starts, or does he start as an unsigned RFA? Love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Plus, what do you think about the PTO update with Makiniemi, the signings with Jarvis and Cousins? And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on what you think your best moments with Johnny Gaudreau was down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video. If you're to subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're able to help you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below. So I can also discuss today's video. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So if you want to check that out, leave a link down in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.